This past weekend, I got credentials to shoot my first ever motorsports race. And even though I've never shot at a car race before, I was still able to walk away with this photo of the winning driver crossing the finish line. Now, it's not a perfect photo, but I did learn quite a few lessons capturing that photo, along with the 1,800 other photos that I captured on the day of the race. So I'm gonna share the good, the bad, the camera gear, and the camera settings that I used as a complete noob to motorsports photography. But before we get into all that, let's actually talk about camera settings, and in particular, autofocus, because we have a lot of fast moving objects. We wanna make sure that the camera is either in continuous autofocus, or in the case of this Canon R6, it has a servo mode and like an AI intelligent mode. So make sure your camera is in one of those two settings, but then also make sure you're in burst mode. So right now the camera is selecting that single shot icon, but you can see these other ones where you can do a low speed burst or a continuous burst, or the one that I like to use was the high speed continuous plus, which just means that when you hit the shutter, instead of taking one photo, it's gonna take multiple photos, because these fast moving objects are very hard to time. So we wanna get off as many photos as possible. So photo tip number one, you will absolutely mess up at first. In fact, I think the mistake I made was not going to all days of the Honda Indy. So it was 3 days. I only had time to go to the last one. But you can see I started the day off with some very candid photos. The cars are coming out. Again, I'm not really sure what to shoot. So I'm just like, oh, maybe I'll shoot portion of the car. I'm shooting at ISO 100, f3.5, maybe hoping to get a fun interaction. The fun part is that the cars actually leave the convention hall from where they're like staging and then exit out into where the track is. And so if you're lucky, you'll get a nice side profile of these cars. The security guard who was behind the corner was kind of like waving us down and telling us, hey, like the next car is coming, because he obviously knew what we were trying to do. You know, the team's coming and going as they're practicing. I like this one here. I think I 2-starred, maybe I'll 3-star it. 1/200, we don't have any fast moving subjects, so we don't need to be at those high burst rates. The media, the people who got credentials, were kind of tiered. The people who were the professionals who do this all the time had pit access. I didn't, so I wasn't able to get right up close and get like nice details of the drivers. As they were getting in, I did have the 70-200, so I was kind of shooting some of these through shots, trying to frame them up. These were during the practice run where the cars were taking off. I shot these pretty fast, 1/800. There's a little bit of blur on the tires, but I thought it wasn't very exciting. And so I ended up slowing down my shutter here to 1/100, upped my aperture to balance out my exposure. It's always tricky panning, especially when you've never done it before, to kind of figure out, okay, I'm listening to the motor, I'm listening to the car coming, how fast do I need to be moving? And so it really does take a few attempts for you to time it properly, and I don't think I ended up getting one in this spot that I was super proud of. And this is where I ran into a little bit of a problem and thought, well, the fence is in the way, and I'm shooting with the 24-70. That lens doesn't have a focus limiter. It doesn't say, like the 70-200, you can say focus past 2.5 meters, and so it knows to focus past the fence, whereas this lens doesn't. And so I was kind of struggling, and I ended up putting it into manual focus at one point and just trying to manually figure out where the car was gonna be and then like time it, but you'll see some of those photos in a second. Most of the day, I was shooting either in manual mode with auto ISO or in shutter priority with auto ISO. Here's a nice one. We have, like this string of cars going around the corner. I think I gave this one a 3-star, but the composition is nice. It's nice and sharp. Maybe the only disadvantage is that there's a little bit of softness because I didn't time it perfectly in the holes in the fence. And so ideally what you want is you want to put your lens right up to the fence so that if the fence does get in your shot, it's kind of like on the left and the right side, not in the middle. Maybe I could jump into the develop tab and just dehaze them a little bit to kind of try and solve it. One of the things that the motorsports photographers look for is the tires. Here we go. The tires lifting off the ground kind of implies that it's moving fast. As the car is getting closer, maybe my shutter speed is a little bit too low. Actually, you know what? The autofocus probably missed a little bit. And sometimes when the fence is in the way, that can happen. So at the beginning of the race, I'm not really sure what to focus on because there's so many cars, and as a noob who's never done this before, I really don't know what to pay attention to. One of the things that the motorsports guys, at least the ones that I've seen posted online, they like to do this kind of like tilted angle, which I think helps add some energy and some sense of motion to the frame, especially when you're shooting at these faster shutter speeds like 1/4000. But a lot of missed shots in here. The challenge when you're shooting at f11 in this case is that the fence will be in focus. So when you're panning, the horizontal lines basically just turn into solid lines, like you can't focus past them. You know, maybe it's a cool effect. In my case, I wasn't super proud of it. Oh, these ones I'm not super proud of. Very shaky. I think I tried switching in and out of a monopod. Here we have the fence line in it, so I've slowed my shutter speed down to 1/50th. I've still got that super stopped down f11 aperture, so I'm getting hopefully more in focus. We were at this spot where the cars were at a straightaway and they're moving extremely fast, which makes it hard to capture. And then we came to an opening in the fence and I thought, well, maybe this will improve my chance because there's no fence in the way. But the problem is that because there is still a barrier, I couldn't actually see when the cars were coming, and the autofocus system couldn't pick up the car until the very last minute. And so I'm basically like, well, I can't manual focus because I'm not good enough for that. I can't autofocus because the camera's not going to be able to capture that fast. And so a lot of these photos, I'm just like desperately grasping, trying to get something. And basically none of them turned out. First reactions, first time shooting at a race. Let's just say it was a lot harder than I thought. I was shooting a little bit on the 70-200 and felt like it was a little bit too tight. We do have these openings which make it a little bit easier to get a shot because otherwise you're gonna get some of the fence. Now you can go up close to the fence, but I'll put some photos on screen now. We were at one spot and you can see here in the GoPro footage that we're just like really tight between two barriers. And I think the mistake I made is that I couldn't see the cars coming. So a lot of the shots are just missed. But we have another chance to do this again. And you can kind of see now we have a porthole that we can shoot through. We have the Princess Gates over there. And honestly, I think this will give us a better chance of actually getting something. What do you think, Stefano?
Me? I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah?
You know, we're missing a few shots when we're trying to pan.
Rich is just laughing at us. Look, at a race, they're going as fast as they can. The only time I've done this before was at a track day, and the cars are just driving leisurely. Here, they're just ripping it by, and it's a lot harder. After the warm-up, they had some sports cars come out, so some Porsches and Mercedes, and this is where we actually had an opening in the fence to pan through, which is gonna help because one, I'm close to the fence, so I can see the cars coming, and I'll get some nice clean shots, in this case, of this Mercedes, which turned out at 1/50th because these cars do go a little bit slower than like the 200 kilometers of some of the Indy cars. Still a lot of misses until we got to later in the day where some friends gave me a few more tips on how to improve my chances of actually getting a photo. What's that?
My bud here, he's got a 135.
135?
Yeah, best lens ever.
135? Oh no,
yeah.
Sony.
Best lens. Nah, man. Yeah.
Sony.
Nah, man, best lens ever.
Sony.
Best one.
If everything else fails today, the one thing I want to get is a nice panning shot of the McLaren. The orange and the black. What do you think, Rich?
That's the one.
Rich says that's the one I gotta get.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which one are we panning?
You know what? Right now I'm gonna pan a 100 to 500, and it's way too close. So mine are gonna be bad.
I've got the 24-70, but I think I can do it. Other Rich, what do you think?
What do you got? You got a Sigma on you?
Definitely the 70-200. Just get up as close as you can into their face.
You heard it first. 70-200 up in their face. Oh, hold on.
This is gonna get the best shots of the day. Okay, this is a stock 18
got
to
it.
55. This is proof that you don't need fancy, expensive lenses to shoot. Just you wait. Okay.
So if we take a quick look at the gear I was shooting on, all the photos that you're seeing were the Canon R5, which a lot of people were actually shooting on R5s and R3s, probably more Canon R3s than I've ever seen in my life in one place, but I did have the 70-200, I did have the 24-70 standard zoom lens, I did have the 15-35, but I didn't use it for photo because it was a little bit too wide, so that one actually lived on the Canon R6 II, which I shot all of the vlog segments and the video that you're seeing on. I did forget to bring my lens hood, which is a rookie mistake. Typically when I'm out shooting, I don't bring it because it's not needed. In this case, we were shooting away from the sun, so we didn't have to worry about backlighting and lens flare, so maybe the lens hood didn't really matter. But I was using an ND for some of the shots that you'll see in a bit, where it was bright out and I'm trying to shoot at 1/30th, 1/50th, and even when you crank your aperture up to f8, f16, sometimes you still do need 2 to 3 stops of ND to balance out your exposure. I started realizing that I needed to focus less on capturing every single car and then have a little bit more of a strategy about which car did I actually want to capture. Most of the photographers that are there and have credentials are either shooting for a team or shooting for media or shooting for a newspaper, and are either going to focus on a couple cars or just like the winning car, so that when they write their story, they have a photo of that car to share. In my case, I'm just kind of looking for whatever composition looks good. But then what I really wanted to do was get a shot of, so actually this one's not too bad. We have a car and a chasing car, but again, what is the story I'm trying to tell here? Is this the winning car? Is this a team I'm shooting for? But we ended up moving to this opening section where I could shoot some of these cars from behind. So this photo, for example, you get that nice path that all the cars are following. You can kind of see them following each other. I was able to pan some of the cars at a 1/30th, 1/40th, 50th shutter speed. At a straightaway, they're going way too fast, but if you can find a spot where you know they're going to be driving at a consistent line, at a consistent speed, and preferably a little bit slower. Oh, look, there's a Canon car. Fun fact, that car ended up crashing. Did we have a photo of it? I think so. Canon crashed. So before we jump into the final race, there was a driver introduction where the drivers just all came up and shook hands and said, "Hey, what's going on with the mascot?" The driver that ended up winning this day, I think won the previous day as well. And so I was able to get a nice shot of him coming up on stage. That ended up going into like a nice Instagram carousel. Again, thinking, what stories do I want to tell? There's the news. For the final race, they ended up letting us go on the grid where all the drivers were kind of prepping. And so I'm just trying to get some nice candid moments. You know, "Oh Canada" and the anthems were going, so I kind of got one of the whole team there. But really capturing photos that are unique to the location where you're shooting. So in this case, because we have the Princess Gates in Toronto, that's kind of like the iconic shot. And so I knew I wanted to get a shot of the cars kind of like going down with the Princess Gates in the background. Now, one of the things I did do, I believe, was set my focus point to around the right-hand side of the frame. So I guess it was grabbing the Sirius car over here. My photographer brain is like, oh, why don't they just drive down the middle? That would be a nice shot. But the cars are keeping that line that's like efficient for them, doing whatever they need to do. And so a lot of the time you're gonna have to adjust and say, okay, pay attention, where are they driving? Anticipate that they're gonna be there and set your focus point, set your composition to work with the way that the drivers are driving. And now the pace car is gone and I'm shooting at a faster shutter speed. So 1/3200th, ISO 125, because I am in auto ISO, I'm letting the camera determine that. So you'll see that again fluctuate. There we're now down to 100 ISO, but there's one that I chose that I ended up posting on Instagram again because this driver ended up winning the race. It's kind of like the shot that you want to get if you're not specifically shooting for a team. But the cars are driving full speed, kind of turn around, now shoot them going the other way at full speed. You know, my composition is a little bit slanted, and I have, you can tell in the foreground here, part of the fence or part of the barrier. Now, the trick with actually editing these photos is to not over edit them. I find that if you jump right into presets, sometimes they can be a little bit too heavy-handed. Actually, this one's not too bad. Atlantic Highlands is designed to pull a little bit more yellow out, so it works. In this case, my all-around preset that I would use is probably Thunderbird. Rustic Dawn, you know, probably too much desaturation. Nordic Tundra is one that kind of pulls out the vibrance, like the blues, a little bit to make things pop. So maybe that's one that works good, but I haven't done any adjustments here. But really, you don't need to over edit these photos because you want the colors of the team to be true to life. But if you're looking for Lightroom presets for whatever type of photos you're editing, you can check out my links down in the description. These ones that I just used aren't available yet because there are still some people beta testing them, but if you want to be the first to get your hands on when those presets are announced, you can check out my newsletter, my email list down in the description to be the first to be notified when those presets are officially available. So after we shot those kind of guaranteed photos at the faster shutter speed, Rich and I ended up moving down the track to a location where there was a hole and a turn. And I really like this because we were able to do some like 50mm, 24mm panning shots. These ones turned out okay, but again, you can see the problem is as I'm tracking, I'm running into the fence because there's a lot of photographers trying to get their shot through the fence. And then the other problem, of course, being that if you don't align properly as you're panning, the horizontal portion of the fence will just completely block out the car. But here's one that's not too bad. 1/40th, ISO 250, because again, we're in auto ISO, but there are a lot of bad ones. There's a nice one of the one of the team that won. 1/30th of a second. Thunderbird, Atlantic Highlands 2. Let's do that. That's after. There's one that I got of the McLaren car. So before, after, just some basic light editing just to kind of make the photo pop a little bit. And then Rich and I moved to this spot, which was probably my favorite of the entire race. So 24mm. This is the one that I actually posted on Instagram, and I'll show you the before and the after because I also edited it with my presets. There's the before, there's the after. I removed a couple of things on the road. Very light edits, just saturated the oranges a little bit. But for me, this one really tells the story of the car going around the corner. Yeah, it's not perfectly sharp, but it is 1/50th of a second. And we have kind of like the main portions of the car where you can still tell it's a car. It's a relatively smooth pan. I'm sure I could probably do better, or probably one of you could do a lot better than I could. So here's the plan. We are now on top of a roof. Stefano, what do you think of this photo spot?
This right here?
Yeah.
It's a solid like 8 out of 10.
It's actually a little bit easier because we can see the cars coming from way down there. And I think we're gonna throw it into electronic shutter, and that will help us see and track the cars because the screen won't actually black out on us. But the finish line is right there. I don't know if you can see it. So hopefully we'll get the finishing shot. Now at this point, we knew who was going to win the race. We were able to get access. These are terrible. We jumped up onto the roof of the hotel, which we had access and permission to be on. It made it a little bit easier to track the cars since this was the same straightaway where I messed up earlier, except now we're elevated and we could see the cars coming. And the one shot that we all knew we wanted was that leading car, that winning car, passing the finish line. So I was able to practice on a lot of these other cars. 1/25th. See, these first few are really bad. They're really not that great. What I ended up doing here was actually putting my camera into electronic shutter, knowing that they were moving faster and that the exposure wasn't changing. I could set it based on the location because I'm not moving. I get my settings right. I practice my panning. You can see just how many times I practiced. If I just narrow this down to the ones that I've picked, so the ones that I 1-star are usually the ones that have something good. There was a massive crash and a bunch of cars all got wiped out at the same time. I panned the tow truck. Look at that. But then this car was the one that I wanted to get a shot of. And so I practiced probably 10, 15 laps before the final runaround just to see what I was comfortable with. It's almost like every other shot is shaky and then not. The 70-200 does have a panning mode too, which I did try, but for some of these shots we were kind of diagonal. I find it doesn't really work that good. From a zoomed out perspective, these don't look too bad, but then this was the final lap. And if I zoom in here, the nice thing is that the driver gave like a fist pump. So they would never do that unless it was the final finishing lap. And so it kind of really tells this story. 1/50th I managed to get. But if I go back, and I think this just might be me getting super lucky. You can see at the very end of the set here, focused, blurry, like super sharp on that one, blurry moments before the finish line, and then maybe a little bit less blurry, but good enough and he's right on the finish line. And that became the photo that I ended up sharing to Instagram. Like, this is the winning photo of this race. And then back to blurry shots. So I don't know. I am still learning how to pan, how to shoot motorsports photography. It is hard. If you think there's anything I missed, any photo tips that you want to add, let me know down in the comments. Or if you want to see another video on shutter speed, you can check this one out here. Or if you want to see my full playlist on photography tips, you can check out this right here. And until the next one, grab your camera, get out, and go shoot photos.